Hello and welcome back. In our final video on lifespan development, we are going to be covering a variety of topics, from gender development theories, to parenting, to aging and the end of life and the stages of death. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The first thing we're going to take a look at today are gender development theories, and why we choose to behave in certain ways that are gender specific. So the first thing we need to do is really establish the difference between sex, gender, and gendered behavior. So let's start with the difference between sex and gender. Sex is the biological makeup of an individual, whether they are male or female. Gender is a psychological state, how a person identifies as either a man or a woman or non-binary. This can be the same or it can be different than a person's biological sex. When it comes to gender behaviors, these are a social construct. The types of behaviors that we ascribe to either men or women that have no biological basis, there's no biological explanation as to why these behaviors are attributed to men or women, but they are social constructs that society often tells us that this is a way that men or women should behave or act. And so the question is, how do we learn these behaviors? How do we establish the behaviors that we see in ourselves that can often be attributed to gendered behaviors? There are two major theories looking at gender development. The first one is known as the social learning theory. And the social learning theory tells us that when we learn how to act and behave according to the gender that we identify with, we often do so through observation and imitation. So it's purely observational, that the way we see things as we grow up, the different behaviors that we see through our family, through media, through television, through all sorts of outlets, tells us how we should behave, and we sort of just go along with it. We often don't stop and think if this behavior is appropriate or accurate or not. We just imitate what we have seen by others. The gender schema theory, on the other hand, says that we do stop and compare. That what we experience as children is that we kind of just go about our lives, and every once in a while we stop and we question if our behaviors are aligned with our learned gender schema, our schema for how specific genders do behave and act. And then we adjust our behavior, if need be, to match the schema for the gender that we identify with. So the idea here is that we grow separately from gendered behavior, and then we see how we are supposed to act and adjust our behaviors towards those gender typing or gender stereotypes. Both theories have value, as they posit those certain behaviors and inclinations that we have are not biologically based or in any way evolutionarily tied to behavior-specific sex, but that these are socially influenced instead. The question just comes down to whether or not a person questions or challenges their behavior or does so without really thinking about it. There are also 4 parenting styles that affect a person's development. How our parents treat us is also going to have an influence on our self-concept, our sense of self, and how we develop through our lifespan. The 4 different parenting styles really fall on a continuum, looking at 2 major factors of responsiveness and demandingness, and whether that responsiveness is high or low, or the demandingness is high or low. If a parent is low on demandingness, they don't set high expectations, and they're low on responsiveness, they're not very responsive, so there's no expectations and no responsiveness, we call that a neglecting parenting style, really an absent parenting style, because they are not doing either of these things for their children. If they are high on responsiveness, but low on demandingness, meaning they are very responsive to their child, they give them everything that they want, but they don't hold high expectations for them, we refer to that as permissive. a parent that allows a child to do a lot without asking for much in return. If the opposite happens, where a parent is very demanding but not very responsive, high expectations, but does not really listen or respond to the needs of the child, we refer to that as authoritarian. You can think of it like totalitarian parenting. There are rules that are strictly enforced, and there is really no compromise or responsiveness taking place. And then, of course, there is high responsiveness and high demandingness, where there are high expectations, but also responsive to the child's needs, and that is known as authoritative parenting style. And so how a parent treats a child within these 4 parenting styles can have an influence on their development as well. And after adulthood and after parenting, we reach the end of our lifespan, and we start to see some changes take place both physically, mentally, and emotionally as we reach the end of our lifespan. In cognitive psychology, we start to see a decline in what's known as fluid intelligence. This is the type of intelligence that is the ability to think abstractly and reason. Solving new problems is something that becomes more challenging as we age. Think about parents or grandparents who struggle with new technologies, figuring them out and getting them to work. Part of the reason they might struggle is due to a decline in their fluid intelligence. However, they do have an increase in their crystallized intelligence. This is the accumulated knowledge that they have that increases. So facts and general knowledge, that type of information, usually gets better as they age. So stories about childhood and growing up, they might remember very well. Now, this does not include some physical decline in memory that could be caused by the reduction of neurotransmitters such as ACH with Alzheimer's, but typically speaking, crystallized intelligence gets better. But with physical decline, we do see some physical changes. Women, for example, experience menopause, the decrease in the production of estrogen in women, and as we said, Alzheimer's, there is the decrease in the production of neurons that produce ACH that could cause some long-term memory problems as well. And as we reach the end of our lifespan, we also experience coming to terms with our own mortality, coming to terms with death. And a researcher named Elisabeth Kubler-Ross wanted to understand how people come to terms with their own mortality. And what she found by studying individuals on hospice and in nursing homes was that many people go through what is known as the stages of death. You may have heard them before as stages of grief and how we use them to explain how we feel when someone else dies, but that was actually not its original intention. Its original intention was to help us understand how we come to terms with our own impending death for those who have the ability to contemplate it. This is not going to be the same for every individual, but really for those who have had time to consider the end of their lifespan, that we might see these stages of death come into play. And so these 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance are the stages that some people do go through as they reach the end of their lifespan. Not everybody experiences it, not in the same order, and not in a step-by-step concrete time frame. And some people will not get through all 5. But this is a general trend that she saw that she was able to report on. Other people saw similarities with how people go through grieving to how they come to terms with their own death. And that is how these stages of death eventually got turned into the 5 stages of grief. But that is where we're going to go ahead and end our unit. By now we've taken a look at the entire lifespan from womb to tomb, from prenatal development to the 5 stages of death, looking at cognitive, physical, and social emotional development throughout the lifespan as well. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of how we change over the course of our life. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember, be kind to your mind.